Committee will come to order. First of all, I welcome my ranking member, Issa. Today's hearing is entitled Protecting the Public from Waste, Fraud, and Abuse, the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act of 2009. Today's hearing is entitled, of course, Protecting Public from Waste. H.R. 1507 is an important piece of legislation. This committee has reported favorably similar legislation on a bipartisan basis in each of the last two Congresses. The House of Representatives has twice passed similar bills, once in 2007 with 331 votes, and again as a bipartisan amendment to the stimulus legislation earlier this year. Unfortunately, the stimulus amendment was removed in conference with the Senate. However, this provides us with the opportunity to hear from the new administration on this reform, to work and engage them on possible change to the bill, and to consider the ongoing need of strong whistleblower protections. I want to thank Representative Van Hollen and Platts for the efforts to support government whistleblowers. As this committee has long recognized, enhancing whistleblower protection helps us to fulfill our role of bringing about more honest, accountable, and effective government for the American people. Whistleblowers risk their careers to challenge abuses of power and gross waste of government resources. At a time when America needs the best value for every dollar spent, we need these protections now more than ever. This is particularly true now that billions of stimulus dollars and billions more aimed at stabilizing the financial system are at stake. H.R. 1507 will ensure that the federal employees responsible for monitoring the financial recovery programs are not deterred from reporting mismanagement of taxpayer dollars. Government employees are often in the best position to call attention to the illegality of waste because they witness what is happening inside the government on a day-to-day basis. Unfortunately, as we will hear today, under the current inadequate system, whistleblowers have too often been left out to dry. Instead of being rewarded for their courage, they have actually been destroyed in some instances. Over the last decade, legal victories for public employees have been almost non-existent. Employees have been fired and disciplined for disclosing evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse, simply because an administrative judge determined it was part of their job to do so. That's contrary to the whole point of the whistleblower law. If passed, H.R. 1507 would take a landmark step in restoring Congress' intent to protect employees from retaliation. Importantly, H.R. 1507 also extends strong whistleblower protection to employees of government contractors. Congress wisely included similar protections for private recipients of stimulus funds. However, no similar safeguard was included when Congress passed the bailout last fall. This bill would extend the right to disclose waste, fraud, and abuse without fear of retaliation to employees of all government contractors, including those who accepted bailout funds. The Oversight Committee has documented the accountability and transparency shortcoming of the TARP program, and we will continue to do so. However, by empowering insiders to disclose any financial misconduct, this legislation provides an immediate accountability fix to that program. Lastly, whistleblowers' protections are important, not only in safeguarding America's tax dollars. We need them to better protect our families towards this end. We have worked closely with the House Intelligence Committee in drafting strong whistleblower protections for national security personnel. Since September 11, 2001, it has become more and more evident that national security personnel need to be able to sound the alarm effectively without fear of reprisal, and without having to turn to the media in order to do so. We need to provide national security personnel with safe, responsible channels for disclosing evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse. H.R. 1507 also provides these employees with a meaningful remedy if they are retaliated against something that does not exist under current law. This is an important aspect of the legislation that will strengthen the national security of the country, and I look forward to hearing more from our witnesses on this issue. We're pleased that the administration is testifying today to express the President's support for the principles of protecting whistleblowers and to offer constructive comments on how this bill can be strengthened and implemented. Although whistleblower legislation often involves disagreement between the executive and the legislative branches, we understand that, I'm encouraged by the efforts to resolve these differences and promote greater accountability and transparency in government. I will close by noting simply that this legislation is long, long, long overdue. And without whistleblowers and the unfiltered information that only insiders can provide, the oversight and investigative functions vested in Congress would be seriously compromised. I am pleased to have the opportunity today to hear from the administration, employees, and experts about this reform. And now I yield 5 minutes to the ranking member of the committee, who him and I have worked very hard along with the sponsors of this bill to get us here today, Congressman Issa from the great state of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this important hearing today and for your bipartisan support of whistleblower protections and this bill. We're here today to hear from the administration because waste, fraud, and abuse is the mandate of this committee. These tools are the tools we need in order to uncover waste, fraud, and abuse are our own staff we regularly count on, General Accountability Office, the IGs of the various agencies, and absolutely, without fail, whistleblowers both in and out of the government. Without these individuals willing to come forward and uncover the most dangerous failures within the government, we would find ourselves exposed from a national security standpoint, we would find ourselves exposed from a financial standpoint, and in this day of increasing litigious activity, we might often find ourselves the subject as defendants in lawsuits because of our failure to know what we needed to know. During this hearing, we will be able to examine current law that protects whistleblowers and review the need for strengthening those laws. We will also be able to highlight, discuss, and explore any issues that may be raised by expanding existing whistleblower protections. And I might note that these protections have been contracting because of decisions made by the court, so many of the expansions today are in fact simply restoring what was the original intent of Congress. The support and protection of whistleblowers in the federal government is obvious, vital to rooting out the waste, fraud, and abuse, and mismanagement. Expansion of these laws may, however, raise some important issues and create unintended real-world consequences when implemented. We look forward to hearing from the administration any questions, comments, or any scenarios that they believe may not have been considered in this legislation thus far. Like all legislation, it can have unintended consequences. We look forward to active dialogue to ensure that we minimize that, but we cannot allow the continued loss or degradation of whistleblower laws that today cause us not to have the full support of both our contractors and our government employees. And Mr. Chairman, I might note that next door in Judiciary, we've moved a very expansive piece of legislation that expands the ability to sue for profit the American government at all levels, federal, state, and local, for federal protection and recover monies. Now, that's well-meaning legislation. It has been on the books since Abraham Lincoln, and it's important. But we cannot have just plaintiff trial lawyers doing the work of the people. And I might particularly note and ask for unanimous consent to be included in the record that issues— Without objection, so ordered. Thank you. Issues such as the Jane Harmon incident where she was wiretapped, but Congress was unaware that a member of Congress had in fact been picked up on a wiretap of another investigation, that was withheld until a whistleblower made it obvious. So not all whistleblowers involve money or even per se mismanagement, but often can result in us getting need-to-know information. We cannot allow ourselves not to have that need-to-know information. I thank the Chairman for his leadership and yield back.
Thank you very much. At this time, I yield 5 minutes to the man that's really responsible for us being here today, a person that has really done a marvelous job on this legislation, H.R. 1507, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Van Hollen, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Mr. Issa for holding this hearing today, and I'm not going to take my 5 minutes because I want to associate myself with the remarks of both the gentlemen, the Chairman and the Ranking Member. I've worked very closely with Mr. Platts on this legislation as well as other members of this committee and other members of Congress. As both the Chairman and the Ranking Member have said, I think we feel it imperative to move forward and strengthen whistleblower protections. Yesterday, the House passed legislation on a bipartisan basis to strengthen the procurement rules and regulations of the Department of Defense so that we could make sure taxpayers were better protected. This is part of that effort, and we welcome any constructive suggestions that the witnesses may have to offer. I thank the Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any other members seeking recognition? Mr. Kucinich of Ohio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Federal employees who do the right thing and expose wrongdoing that's happening in their job within their sphere of activity deserve to be thanked, not punished. And yet we know that various court decisions do not protect employees when they come forward with information that's vital to the public interest. Government isn't some insular game. Government isn't a rule unto itself. What makes this a democracy is transparency, is that we can actually see what's happening, and that if something's going wrong, that we have a chance to make it right. The secrecy that has surrounded our government has put our nation's democracy in jeopardy. And this approach towards transparency, which is reflected in the bill that's being discussed, and in Congress's approach to try to restore whistleblower protection, is really vital to trying to restore trust in government and trust in the Congress's ability not just to provide oversight, but to make sure that those who have information feel free to come forward with that information and not be punished for it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you very much, and recognize the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you so much,
Mr.
Chairman, for today's hearing on H.R. 1507, the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act of 2009. I'm looking forward to hearing about the new administration's plan to enhance whistleblowing protections for federal employees and contractors, and to hearing testimony from federal employees who have faced retaliation for fulfilling their duty to expose evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse. The healthy functioning of our government and the likelihood of this committee to properly oversee its operations depends on the ability of federal employees and contractors to report instances of corruption and misuse without fear of reprisal. For this reason, I was pleased to vote for similar legislation in each of the last Congresses and look forward to seeing these provisions finally signed into law by our new president. Federal employees and contractors are often our first and only line of defense against government waste and manipulation, while recent history makes their dual role as civil servants and watchdogs even more crucial. The unprecedented levels of government spending in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 and the current engagements in Iraq and Afghanistan require detailed oversight from Congress, which would be impossible without the honest disclosure from federal employees and contractors of what is really happening on the ground. It's critical to our economic and our national security that Congress is notified of instances of waste, fraud, and abuse, and that these employees are able and willing to share their information and are able to remain a part of our civil infrastructure. And so I'd like to thank each of the witnesses today for their testimony as we seek to strengthen the protections for those with the courage to fulfill their duties and disclose evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse. I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing. After 8 years of unprecedented secrecy and bizarre claims of executive privilege, it's essential that this committee act to restore transparency to the federal government. The Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act is a crucial part in that endeavor. The primary reason we should enhance protection for whistleblowers is because it is in our national interest to do so. A lack of whistleblower protection simply cloaks problems that cannot be solved until we're aware of them. We will hear compelling testimony today from Teresa Chambers, who was fired from the United States Park Police for accurately reporting the capacity of her agency. We must know about agency issues such as this one she brought to the public's attention if we're to solve the problem. Ms. Chambers seems to have been fired as a result of political interference by the prior administration. Perhaps greater oversight into the operation of agencies such as the Federal Emergency Management Agency could have mitigated the catastrophic impacts of Hurricane Katrina, but regrettably, at that time, Congress and the public did not learn about agency shortcomings until after the disaster struck. In his written testimony today, Louis Fisher states the presidential authority to keep information secret has been exaggerated. Legislative action such as that outlined in H.R. 1507 could preclude a recurrence of administrative issuance of directives for our military to torture detainees as a standard method of interrogation, for example. Of course, whistleblower protections are essential for federal agencies to function efficiently. However, it's even more critical to protect whistleblowers so that we may identify and correct shortcomings in our efforts to guard against terrorist attack, crime, and natural disaster. I applaud this legislation. I particularly applaud the leadership of our colleague, Mr. Van Hollen from Maryland. I look forward to supporting the legislation and to these hearings. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't see Mr. Platts, but he also had a great role in terms of making certain that we were here today.
On his committee.
Right, but he was been very involved in this, along with Congressman Van Hollen as well. We will turn now to our first panel, which will consist of one government witness, Mr. Day. Recently joined the Obama administration as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Justice Department's Office of Legal Policy. Before joining the administration, Mr. Day was a partner at Mayor Brown. Previously, he had served as General Counsel to the Commission on the Prevention of WMD, Proliferation and Terrorism, Counsel to the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, and Counsel to the 911 Commission. Before we hear from the witness, I want to note that we have several government agencies in attendance today, all of which I understand work together in preparing the testimony that Mr. Day will deliver. I thank all of you for that. Thank you for your involvement, and also that you recognize how important this is as well. Mr. Day, it is long-standing committee policy that we swear our witnesses in. So could you please stand, raise your right hand? That you agree to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, if so answer in the affirmative. Let the record reflect that the witness answered in the affirmative. You may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Towns, Ranking Member Issa, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the...
Certainly. You pull the mic a little closer to you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act. This administration strongly supports protecting the rights of whistleblowers. We recognize that the best source of information about waste, fraud, and abuse in government is often a government employee committed to public integrity and willing to speak out. Empowering whistleblowers is a keystone of the President's firm commitment to ensuring accountability in government. A government employee who speaks out about waste, fraud, or abuse performs a valuable public service. Such acts of courage and patriotism, which can sometimes save lives and often save taxpayer dollars, should be encouraged rather than stifled. Yet too often, whistleblowers are afraid to call attention to wrongdoing in their own workplace. We need to empower all federal employees as stewards of accountability. Put simply, accountability cannot solely be imposed from the top down. The bottom line is we cannot tolerate waste, fraud, or abuse, and we must make sure that federal employees at all levels are able to do what it takes to eliminate it. At the same time, we must preserve the President's constitutional responsibility with regard to the security of national security information and ensure that agency managers have effective tools to discipline employees who themselves may be engaged in waste, fraud, or abuse. We recognize that the executive branch and Congress have long held differing views regarding the extent of the President's constitutional authority over national security information. Putting aside those constitutional differences to the extent possible, our focus today is on achieving common ground and a workable solution towards our shared goal of increasing protections for federal whistleblowers, including those who work in the national security realm. Creating a system that sets up the rights incentives for federal employees and managers is not easy, as evidenced by multiple efforts to reform the system in each of the past 3 decades. This administration believes that the time has come to amend the system once again. I would like to discuss some key components of the whistleblower reform legislation, both with respect to civil service reform and the national security issues that are of interest to this committee. Turning first to the civil service reform issues. This bill would make a number of important changes to the ways in which whistleblower claims are adjudicated. For example, the bill would, for the first time, allow whistleblowers to obtain compensatory damages. That is a matter both of simple fairness and of practicality. A whistleblower who suffers retaliation should be made whole, plain and simple, and we agree with this measure. This bill also makes several important changes to the definition of what would constitute a protected disclosure. Under current law, a whistleblower is not protected if she informs her boss of wrongdoing, only to later find out that her boss was the very person responsible for the wrongdoing. Thus, under current law, the employee would be protected for going to the Washington Post, but not for going to her own boss. Changing the law to eliminate this disparity would encourage employees to tell their supervisors about problems in the first instance, which is usually the easiest way to resolve them. This administration also supports modification of what is known as the normal duty disclosure rule. Under that rule, an employee is not protected when he discloses wrongdoing as part of his normal job duties, unless he makes that disclosure outside of normal channels. This administration believes, however, that normal duty disclosures should be protected, particularly when public health and safety are at stake. Beyond the civil service arena, this administration also believes that whistleblowers in the national security realm must have a safe and effective method of disclosing wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. We are pleased to see that this bill provides full whistleblower protections to Transportation Security Administration screeners, who literally stand at the front lines of our nation's homeland security system. They deserve the same whistleblower protections afforded to all other employees of the Department of Homeland Security. As this committee knows, the intelligence community is generally excluded from the existing Whistleblower Protection Act. The Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act of 1998 represents Congress's most recent attempt to provide a safe and effective channel for national security whistleblowers to report wrongdoing. That act provides a vehicle for intelligence community employees to report matters of urgent concern to Congress. The ICWPA, however, affords the individual employee no avenue for a potential disclosure beyond her specific agency. This administration believes that no federal agency should be able to hide its own wrongdoing. For this reason, we propose the creation of an extra agency avenue within the executive branch for federal employees who wish to make classified disclosures to Congress under the ICWPA. This mechanism could be composed of senior presidentially appointed officials from key agencies within and outside the intelligence community, including inspectors general, and would ensure that no individual agency can rely inappropriately on alleged classification concerns to stifle disclosures of waste, fraud, and abuse. If, under the procedures set forth under the ICWPA, an agency head declines to transmit information to Congress or declines to provide instructions to the employee on how he may do so, the employee could appeal to this new entity, which could overrule the agency head. Individual employees, moreover, we believe, should be entitled to alert Congress to the fact that they have raised a potential disclosure in the ICWPA process or with this new executive branch entity. We also believe that the extra agency mechanism could provide a better vehicle to review alleged retaliatory security clearance revocations than the system currently set forth in H.R. 1507. We are aware that this committee has heard testimony in the past from individuals who have claimed that their security clearances were revoked due to whistleblowing activities. This administration has zero tolerance for such actions. An extra agency mechanism could recommend full relief to the aggrieved employee, including restoration of the clearance, and could ensure that Congress would be notified if that recommendation is not followed. This mechanism would ensure that no agency would remove a security clearance as a way to retaliate against an employee who speaks truths that the agency does not want to hear. Of course, retaliation may take many forms, and we are committed to providing more general protections for intelligence community whistleblowers. Such whistleblowers expose flaws in programs that are essential for protecting our collective national security. One complication, of course, is that intelligence community whistleblowers may well reveal waste, fraud, or abuse in activities that take place within highly classified programs. Due to the sensitive nature of the issues involved, we believe that federal district court review may not be the appropriate vehicle for intelligence community whistleblowers. Rather, a better vehicle may well be the extra agency mechanism within the executive branch that we propose to create. Of course, we look forward to working with the committee in a constructive dialogue to craft a scheme that satisfies all of our shared goals. Finally, this legislation is merely one step in this administration's plan to assure accountability in government. We appreciate the efforts that this committee has made to devise whistleblower protections that work. We look forward to working with you to revise and improve this legislation. And with that, I'd be pleased to take your questions.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Day, for your testimony. Let me just announce to the members that we have 5 votes on the floor, which means that we need at least an hour. So we will go on a break and be back at 11:30. So, Mr. Day, we have to vote around here. So why don't we just stop at this point and then we'll go and vote and come back at 11:30. Thank you very much for your testimony. And we will continue our questioning when we return.